Beirut and the song When I Die here on 88.1 FM WVYC. You are tuned into the voice of York College. My name is Keelan Tollinger, your host for the 3 o'clock hour, and thanks for tuning into this edition of In the Studio on this Friday, April 5th, 2019. We are about 5 weeks until the beginning of finals week here at the college, and I am freaking out as somebody who's going to be graduating with my senior project to complete. As I often bring it up here on the show when I'm giving my general intro about how my week's been. But you know something that I learned this week? It's often a noble cause to just stop what you're doing some time, take a step back, and think about what's in your own power. Because I've been getting, I think, way in over my head about all the things I wanted to accomplish with my study about writing. Like, I want to know, what do all the business and the physical sciences and the social sciences and the humanities think counts as successful communication? How is communication done? What do they write? What do they talk about? What are the students in the classroom doing well with writing and speaking and making visuals? What would help the faculty teach all this massive list of stuff better? And it just took yesterday for me to, again, step back and reevaluate what it is I wanted to accomplish the most. If I could pare things down to a more manageable list of things to find out about, something that I can do in the month and a half I'm still in this college, maybe I'd shift away from the complicated stuff and try something simpler. Answer only 2 questions instead of 4 with what would be the easiest information to gather with what my survey has put out in front of me. Because this is a big spreadsheet of data of more than 20 respondents with completely different concerns than somebody else. And the best option to tell a more in-depth story about something, what's going on, is, I think, to focus on a smaller portion of it. I think it just might save my mind in the long run. But, yeah, worst of all, in contrast to a big project, 3 o'clock on this Friday afternoon is when a big game is on. Not the Super Bowl. I'm not talking about like a baseball or a basketball matchup. But my team, the Liverpool Reds, are playing their soccer in England right now, and this is the worst possible time for the Premier League to schedule a game during my showtime. I wish I was in front of a TV right now watching every bit of the action. But, yeah, I'm here, and I can pull up the score on this computer screen right beside me that we have here in this room. And I can glance at it, I guess, as I'm looking at my notes. But really quick, this is a do-or-die situation for Liverpool as a team, since right now they sit at second place out of 20th in the Premier League. They are one place in the standings behind this powerhouse team that won last season. That's Manchester City. And the only hope my team has right now is to win every single game. There's 6 left, including this one remaining, of this 38-game season, and they cannot tie, and they certainly cannot lose. And right now they're going against this Southampton Football Club at 8 o'clock at night in their region across the Atlantic Ocean, under the Friday night lights. And as important as it is, I'll only check back in on the score occasionally, even though this is like another high-stakes situation that I don't need to tack on to this week's events. But speaking of sports, we'll jump right into a story about how York College has announced they're going to change sports conferences. The schools they're competing against every season will differ drastically in the future. I'll tell you about that in a minute, but we need to get some other things out of the way first. So if you missed last week's show on the conclusion to the Robert Mueller investigation, the 50 Days of Graduation celebration here at York College, and the artificial intelligence program that can make its own music, you do not want to miss coverage of those topics, so head on over to youtube.com and search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger, and you'll find an archive of that show, March 29th, and all the others that have come before it. For this show in particular, I'll be covering an evening with the York College president. This is Dr. Pamela Gunter Smith, who held a town hall meeting in the Waldner Performing Arts Center in coordination with the Student Senate. Lots of very interesting topics to cover during that whole session. It's going to take up a majority of the show, just to give you a heads up. I also attended a lecture yesterday night with a special guest here on the college's campus. It was our writer-in-residence, a professional who gives presentations and helps with lessons around the writing curriculum for a few days during their stay. I'll tell you some of Jessica Abel's accomplishments, her advice on storytelling, and the title of a book that I just bought from her, and how it has relevance to something that I'm doing right now, actually. And finally, some brief news about the Alliance of American Football. You know, the minor league sport that came out to support the NFL after the Super Bowl ended. Yeah, that's folded already. And that's done, and I've got some news about how it happened and possibly why. But before we get into any of that, let's go into the campus news, starting with that departure from the Capital Athletic Conference. it was announced on Tuesday that York would be spending one more season during the 2019-2020 academic year. And it was going to make its way to join the Middle Atlantic Conference, MAC. 23 varsity sports will be making the switch to this new group of opponents, and York is the 18th member of this group now, and it's a much larger stage compared to what they're used to. I've picked up the most familiarity with the CAC watching the men's soccer team here throughout my 4 years on campus, and I think the current count of schools in the conference now stands at 8, when it used to be like 10 or 12, I forget. It was an even number, I know, but it was a bit larger from when I was a freshman. And that's because some schools departed the conference over time, upgraded their programs to a different division. The gist of what I hear from a couple of student athletes and people following the teams here is that they say the Capital Athletic Conference is a sinking ship, unfortunately. And I can't tell you the whole logistics of it, but there are bigger competitions to be had, more glory to be won, I guess, even though York College was a founding member of the CAC back about 3 decades or so in 1989. Collectively, there have been 33 team championships throughout all our different sports. This is according to the Spartan Athletics website, which released this article regarding the change. Now, there is no telling how this school will perform on the field when it comes down to playing, but right now, I think one of the underlying goals is to find a fairer conference that isn't being dominated by one school. And I can tell you this, I hate Christopher Newport University. They are too good, but they are the epitome of evil, at least when it comes to the soccer that I've watched. I mean, they've always placed better than York every season. When there are, when there are like surveys distributed by the sport management majors, and they have a question like, who do you feel is York College's biggest rival? And I always put down CNU. Everybody else seems to be small fry to them, and we have to do something to get away from them. And I guess another factor is the travel. So there were a couple of universities in the CAC that are based in Virginia, and that's a big spread out state. The travel that a school has to go to in order to get here or to get there has to be enormous. The MAC is based mostly in Pennsylvania, with a few outlying ones in southern New York State and New Jersey. And just to list a couple of relevant ones for you, we're talking about Arcadia University, DeSales University, King's College, Lebanon Valley College, Lycoming College, Messiah College, Misericordia University, Stevenson University, Widener University, and Wilkes University. That's only about half of them, but I'm sure you can look at the rest at the MAC website. But that's a lot more local to here, and I think about the same size as far as population, too. I think it'll help a lot, especially to get away from the clutches of Christopher Newport. But the Capital Athletic Conference, though, is mostly, based around this nation's capital. So Salisbury, Maryland, Frostburg State, Maryland, Southern Virginia University. I mean, who I think I'll miss York always torching in soccer, but I'd call it a good switch. And it helps that especially the MAC has taken up a majority of York's non-conference opponents in the recent past. So says the assistant dean for athletics here in this article. Altogether, I think it's a challenge to transition into, but I feel it's welcome. And it's decent that it gets some competition from back where I'm from in the Wilkes-Barre area, like King's College and Wilkes University. But that was a short little tangent on the athletic situation. I've got much more to talk about regarding the York College Presidential Town Hall on Wednesday when I return in a few minutes on In the Studio. It is currently 3:11, and let's see, about 11 minutes into the Liverpool versus Southampton game. Let's see if there's been a score yet. Yes, there is. It's actually Southampton that has scored first in the first 9 minutes. So yeah, let's just stop talking about that for a while and get the first song of the hour underway. It comes from a band I just discovered this week with a very interesting alternative style. Take a listen to Whitney and the group's track Golden Days. I think the second half of the song is particularly a little catchy, but you're listening to 88.1 FM, WVYC, and I'll return in 4 minutes here on the Voice of York College. Stay tuned. Welcome back to 88.1 FM, WVYC, the Voice of York College. That was Whitney with the song Golden Days. And it's about 3:15, so I'm going to take this moment to get you the first weather check of the hour for In the Studio. So let's talk about the biggest event on campus, at least in my perspective, that was possible to attend this week. This was the town hall for students on Wednesday evening at 5 inside the Waldner Performing Arts Center. So it was about an hour and a half with plenty of current issues throughout the time, and I'll cover as much as I can as objectively as possible, I guess. But it was a time for the president, Dr. Gunter Smith, to answer public questions from the student body, and to help her answer some that she couldn't, there had to be about 10 other officials in attendance that could step up and take the mic. A lot of deans and secretaries and coordinators that are in charge of a lot of behind-the-scenes processes. The itinerary, which was formed by student questions submitted ahead of time, involved off-campus housing, campus safety, Greek life, the prevention of sexual and relationship violence, and health and counseling services. Now, there were 3 more topics, which, spoiler alert, they ran out of time to get to, included tuition, and I think admissions and the campus expansion plans in the coming years. Really a shame already. I think that I won't be able to talk about those, but probably the most concerning to students, and simply, I guess, a lot of other issues were loaded onto the front end of this whole event. But as for off-campus housing, a question was raised first along the lines of the student credit requirement to apply to live off of properties such as Jackson Street or any of the local blocks. That was raised to 85 credits and 5 semesters to at least apply to these spots. With the current trajectory of like a typical student, 15 credits every semester, there's not a way for many students to typically reach that requirement. It placed them at about halfway through junior year when they can start to request that option to live elsewhere. And it's a major deal about students having independence and doing their own thing, so the question was raised to understand the reasoning behind this. I'd say quite significant change. Because the president herself acknowledged that the numbers throughout the years has fluctuated some. In freshman year for me, fall 2015, I believe it was 75 credits, and that's again the typical count for a student halfway through junior year. But now it's 85. It also went from 82 to 80, and then to its current state somewhere in between there. But Gunter Smith claimed that in the housing contract to be a full-time student at this school, there is a 3-year requirement, and that off-campus availability only becomes available when all the housing units here at the dorms and apartments are full. In my opinion, I guess it is very dependent on the admission count here. The less students we have, the more get corralled here for a little while. But obviously, there are some people who think that the process and the requirements are very stifling, and it might have led to this issue in the first place, but the final statement on that was that they will continue to examine the requirement every semester and adjust it to the attention of the student experience and the costs. Basically, yeah, I wouldn't expect too much of a plan to be set in stone and change very drastically the way that Dr. Gunter Smith answered that. But next on to campus safety, and there were a few issues raised within this area. So a student senator relayed a concern about lighting gaps around the campus and also surveillance cameras. And the gist of the answer from the president was that student safety was the #1 priority for her, and she passed the response on to an official that controls the campus safety operations here. And his information involved a study that the Pennsylvania State Police came in and did a study 3 years ago, where they made some suggestions as to what the college could do, and YCP carried those out. And they're willing to make some more suggestions about what they can do, and I can't remember if there were any specific spots that were mentioned as being unmonitored or unlit, but the only consideration that has to be made to that end is that the campus can only suggest spots to place cameras which are outside the property, so it takes some more coordination with the township to accomplish stuff like that. Another question involved changing the name from campus safety to campus police. I guess it would sound a lot more authoritative and also align with the officers' authority here to do, I don't know, policing things, make arrests. Once again, this director of campus safety suggested that the phrase is really an umbrella term of sorts, because they also handle fire safety and locking issues and parking enforcement. So really, I guess the plans are to stay the way it is. Maybe if you feel safer hearing the term campus safety instead of campus police too, I'm not too sure. A brief question about lighting up more areas around Northside Commons and some extra security measures like that. Again, the answer was to re-examine what could be done there, take into account who owns the property. Then we moved on to, strangely enough, students with hunting and shooting rifles for their dorms. And the reaction was calm, at least, from everybody. But the campus safety's consensus was that it could happen if there was more student chatter about it. It seemed like it was the first time the officials had heard about that interest. It would need insurance and registration procedures and stuff, but it really came down to student representation. And other colleges and universities have protocols for this, apparently, but also hunting and competitive shooting clubs. And York doesn't have these. It's just a matter of presence that isn't here yet, but the conversation could go on. The main campus entrance off of Country Club Road is also a frequently used one, but it oddly doesn't have a security kiosk like the one of the 4 around Main and West campuses' entrances and exits. It also doesn't have a traffic light, which makes exiting out, especially doing a left turn, very hard to do. The college's response to this suggestion, like so many other things, I guess, was to study the possibilities a bit more, maybe widen the road to fit a kiosk in the median, but Country Club Road is a state highway, and it's difficult to put a traffic light at an intersection with only 3 ways, on a busy road that's backed up enough with the construction going on at the intersections of Country Club Road and South George Street. Doesn't seem too feasible. Next on the agenda was Greek life. Fraternities and sororities. The first question was kind of vaguely phrased from the anonymous student who sent it in ahead of time. Is the administration at odds with this organization? Well, President Gunter Smith didn't seem to know that there were any specific concerns like that, and it was the first she was hearing of it. She didn't seem to have a problem with them, but she asked that above all things these organizations uphold their values. I believe she hinted at the difficulties some branches of Greek life have, like the one at Penn State, with the fallout of its hazing death. And Dr. GS did say something along the lines of, Greek life presents a lot of opportunities for students to be involved on campus, but you don't have to be within it to have a great experience here. And to me, I think that shows a sign of her absolute indifference to it all, honestly. There was a follow-up question from the crowd, someone representing a fraternity who felt as if the Greek life organizations were being neglected and ignored, especially when it came to promotion. The campus tours here make mention of the athletic teams and the many clubs, but nothing at all about the frats and sororities. Dr. GS invited some of these members to discuss what the officials could do to cater to some of those requests, maybe a seat at the table. But I don't know. I'm kind of outside of this issue entirely, and I don't know what form the question is the administration at odds with Greek life. But it was a very iffy response all around. The last topic, at least until I give myself a break here, was a discussion about a coordinator of sexual violence prevention here on campus. This seems to me like a very hotly contested and complex issue, but I'll try to break it down as best as I can. So either a national or a state grant is running out of money to allow York College to hire someone in this important position. And a couple of questions were voiced about getting this coordinator spot replaced, the essential nature of this. And while President Gunter Smith said they were trying to hire a Title IX coordinator and a Title IX investigator, like a hiring process was underway, and another student raised their hand and said, no, the president was missing the point. A coordinator of sexual violence prevention, I don't think is a mandated reporter. And they also have supplies for resources for survivors of assault and abuse. And my impression is that they're a more personal individual to talk to than the 2 others that the administration is trying to hire, and failed to secure, by the way. Actually, I should mention that, because that they accepted a Title IX coordinator, but whoever it was decided not to sign on the dotted line. They're still in the process of that, but this is definitely a sensitive and ongoing issue that I hope the officials they give that a little more thought, especially to cater to the demands of the student body, I think. Right now, the school is going forward by not setting aside some of their budget to fill out this important position, and the grants funds are soon going to dry up. But I would definitely, if this issue is vital to you, seek out more information about this than I can really supply. But however, I've talked for a while, and we're just about halfway through this very interesting, very current town hall event. Let me take a break with another song, and I'll get back to this soon. Coming up next on this hour is this team of female alternative rock superpowers. This is the group called Boy Genius. made up of Julian Baker, Phoebe Bridgers, and Lucy Dacus. Here is their track, Stay Down, on 88.1 FM. You're listening to the voice of your college. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and stay tuned. Boy, genius with the song Stay Down here on 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. And I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger. So as part of this ongoing monitoring of the Liverpool versus Southampton game, the match is at its 30th minute, and Southampton still leads by 1-0 over Liverpool, my team. And still try not to look at it too much. But let me get the public service announcement for the hour out of the way for you. But back to the real news, the continuing coverage of the York College Town Hall with President Gunter Smith. So there was one more topic on the agenda during this event, and that was regarding health and counseling services. There was space for some miscellaneous questions that I can get into as well, but those actually pushed out the time reserved for tuition, admissions, and future campus expansions, again, to my dismay. But first was a question about adding more mental health counselors to the college. I believe the president answered that they've added some individuals on hand and the number of hours they see students, but another official helped supplement the answer and acknowledged, yes, we have a big lack of manpower on this front. Most colleges have a counseling service member for every 1,000 to 1,500 students. Here at York, that's one for every 1,700. I guess about like 2 full-time and 1 part-time, I guess. But it's definitely not enough. And hopefully, since both sides recognize the gap, it could get addressed. But there was a suggestion from the student body about longer walk-in hours for counseling, such as in special circumstances, like a student passing. And it seems as though that'll get some extra future consideration. It's just because the average wait for an appointment is like 3, 4, 5 weeks, and that's just terrible. And like whoever in the administration who said it's unfair to ask that a student has to hold on to an issue that long, I think hit the nail on the head, and so hopefully that gets around to being addressed. The conversation then went to physician availability. The coverage as far as a doctor for every student was a much better margin, at least, though I don't remember a specific ratio. At the request to widen the number of hours to come in, get diagnosed, get prescribed medications, that seemed to be a suggestion that the administration was willing to hear. But it was actually interesting the most that the president herself said that the health facilities probably aren't at the place they need to be right now, location-wise and at modernization standards, I guess, when it comes down to it. I think everyone would like to see the office move from the lower level of the Student Union building to somewhere more sophisticated, and hopefully with more doctors on staff, but that's a budget thing as well. And that finished up what was on the agenda, so then it was time for the miscellaneous questions, starting with the gender-inclusive housing initiative. So in order for, just as an example, a freshman student who doesn't want to live with the typical same-sex roommate situation when they arrive to York College, they have to find a place typically in the Northside Commons, which is more expensive than the freshman dorms, or on West Campus, I think, which winds up being surrounded by upperclassmen. And the president wants to re-examine the housing situations, especially as the campus looks towards renovating and changing up the living options here. Down the line, I guess with the expansion plans, which I would really love to hear about, but there's discussion for more independent living areas when both Main and West Campus residences are eventually revamped several years into the future. Now, as we're going down this list of issues one after another, you might be falling asleep as perhaps some of these don't apply to you, but just hold on for a moment and strap yourself in. Because while this was a night of really civil discussion, I have to say, no one jumping out of their seat and yelling when they heard an answer that sounded unsure or indifferent from the president. There was one question that nobody really saw coming. So one student raised his hand and asked for Dr. Gunter Smith to comment on the rumors of a vote of no confidence against her. And she just visibly bristled, like a porcupine does with its needles at that statement. So I guess no better time to ask, but it could have been better timed regardless on his part. I mean, now this is something that I heard last semester that originates from an issue between the president and the faculty that I don't fully understand. so I've avoided discussing it until now, but this might be the perfect time to clear the air about it. So very quickly, this student was interrupted and corrected by Dr. GS that the vote of no confidence did not happen, apparently, whenever it was. It was deliberated upon, supposedly, by the faculty, but there's been no direct consequence against her so far. She answers to her Board of Trustees' opinions, and by her account, she is in good standing with them. She acknowledged that, as it often happens in other schools, when a vote goes through, the board takes the required action. But again, what occurred only seemed to be a consideration, not a rumor. Just a rumor. But it was back in the late spring semester of 2018 when this issue first started to emerge, I think. And the gist of it was how the college was supposed to solve a $2 million deficit. And this is according to an article written by the York Dispatch. So one solution was $1.4 million in benefit cuts in a budget proposal last May. It was a decision that the faculty apparently didn't have a say in, and it understandably made them upset, made them concerned about transparency. And Gunter Smith acknowledged this to the student who asked the question. She spoke on the lines that she has to make decisions where not everyone comes out happy, but she does everything she can to make sure the students are happy. And I'm not sure how well this issue this guy dug up really was, but yeah, let's just say that it was certainly a negative question that certainly had to be addressed. I just wish it was in a more tactful manner. The student who voiced this left soon after with his group of friends after he got his answer, but I can't tell you where this issue will wind up in the future. But with that, I believe that is the final pressing issue of that eventful town hall. It was a decent turnout of what had to be about 100 students or so, and save for that last shakeup, it was a healthy-looking discussion. And I hope the college plans to have a meeting like this again, maybe with more question screening perhaps, but in the end it's important to have this dialogue between the student body and the officials, because no matter what, ensuring that these issues are at least heard is vital in establishing the administration is serving its proper roles. They cannot adequately cater to a population that they aren't listening to. It just leads to dissatisfaction. And I would hope that many of the students who raised these questions throughout this event came away feeling more positively, but again, I'm outside to so many of these issues from what it seems, and in the end, it's encouraging to me, the most at least, that the conversation these topics is ongoing. But we have reached the 3:38 mark here at WVYC. Time now for another track, and it comes from the band Somos. Here is When You Pass on 88.1 FM. You're listening to the voice of your college, and I'll move on to a segment about the campus's writer-in-residence, Jessica Abel, in just a bit. Stay tuned. Welcome back to 88.1 FM, WVYC, the voice of your college, Somos with their song When You Pass. And I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger. And let's dive into this lecture this past Thursday given by the college's current writer-in-residence. This is from Jessica Abel, who is a cartoonist in one regard, but she's also an author and a teacher as well. Her work has taken her all over the place in a bunch of different mediums, and she spent quite a bit of time in Chicago, but also lived for a while in Mexico City. I think where this should all start, actually, about her work, is how she kicked off the lecture. It was an excerpt from her comic book called Trish Trash, Roller Girl of Mars, a full-color sci-fi adventure about a girl who's a person of color and who's obsessed with roller skate derbies. But as the title suggests, she's on a completely different planet, and there's no roads to practice on, just dry beds of rock. It sounds a lot more complicated when you go deeper because it incorporates issues with social class, and this character wants to live her dreams and escape a life of poverty and hard labor, where her family just mines for water. But the reason I started with this is that Jessica Abel decided to play through the first couple dozen pages on her projector screen, speaking all of the dialogue aloud, even the sound effects of the sci-fi beeps and the vehicles traveling over this dusty Martian landscape. It was quite an interesting intro, if you can imagine a 50-year-old making these noises. But the point of this published success story of hers, though, was that it took a lot of practice and self-doubt to get her to where she is today. She was just like virtually a wandering creative mind out of college who would spend hours lying on the floor of her apartment, unsure of what to commit to. But the story of her whole lecture was capturing how her story structure itself evolve through all her different published works. She started from making parodies of existing works through her comics, then started taking notes about how Archie comics conveyed narratives from way back when. But then she basically got the call of a lifetime. This was from a producer of the radio show This American Life, Ira Glass. He called her up when she was living in Mexico City, and they eventually collaborated on a book together called Radio, an illustrated guide. And it was about This American Life as a series and how they generate stories. So finally, it seemed Abel was growing as a storyteller, and she could write more complex characters and narratives surrounding them. She wrote a book about producing comics, and in the meantime, this was drawing words and writing pictures. But then she published a fiction book in the mid-2000s called La Perdida. And somewhere in between that work was when it clicked for Abel. And now she had the confidence to produce these stories and generate characters that create empathy in us as readers, I think is how she put it. An author doesn't have to like the characters they make, but they have to be likable in a way. They can't just have no redeeming qualities, or else they're just villains. And it seems to me that her works are very grounded in reality. They're very personal tales, again, of finding your place in the world, of overcoming a situation in a lower class. But what I found the most fascinating is that she teamed up with Ira Glass for a second book that came out, I think, in 2016, Out on the Wire, The Storytelling Secrets of the New Masters of Radio. And it's about podcasts, the broadcasts that combine news and compelling characters or personalities in, and it's kind of like a bunch of illustrated interviews with different show producers in this book, and like the best advice for learning how to capture a listening audience. I bought a discounted copy of it, and I hope to read it eventually whenever I have the time, and she was nice enough to sign it. Seems very interesting, and I think the thing that looks more applicable for everybody is her most recent book called Growing Gills, How to Find Creative Focus When You're Drowning in Your Daily Life. This is the coaching position that Jessica feels at home in, apparently, managing projects and making people not feel anxious or stressed about being unable to complete these sorts of undertakings. But altogether, it seems like a very prolific collection that she's been able to publish so far. And now as a teacher, she wants to get more students producing things so they don't, I guess, wind up on the floor of their apartment for hours at a time, staring at the ceiling. But that about does it for this particular topic. Let me get you the current state of the Liverpool versus Southampton game again, and I'm happy to report that there is currently a tie. It is 1-1, Liverpool versus Southampton. I feel much better now. And yeah, we'll take this period now. It's about 3:47 to go into the second weather check of the hour. And now we'll just move right on to the last topic of the afternoon about the Alliance of American Football, if that's okay. Because we're kind of running short on time. But the inaugural week that I covered in mid-February on the February 15th show about how there was hope that this could be the future of the sport, and it had a lot of investment and a lot of promise. At least so said the owners and the promoters during the one weekend that it was being televised on the CBS networks. It seems that dream is just about dead, because it was on Tuesday afternoon that the majority owner named Tom Dundon, who also owns the Carolina Hurricanes, the NHL team, announced that this minor league's operations were suspended, most likely for good, in my opinion. He became the man in charge when the two founders, who also needed a lot of money to get this thing started in the first place, their names are Charlie Ebersol and Bill Polian. They signed away their league because they were concerned about the money needed to keep running this process already 10 days into the season kickoff. So they've taken the suspension to reassess how the AAF is going to run their business, because they were far from profitable and simply draining away what was in their investors' bank accounts. But football seems to be the only major American sport that has the NFL owning an entire business monopoly over its functions. Other minor leagues work out fine when it comes down to it. I mean, local teams in hockey, like the Hershey Bears, or in baseball, like the York Revolution. I mean, these minor pro teams are often partnered with major teams, so they can develop some players that maybe aren't ready for the big leagues yet. I think I think a portion of what was missing was that direct partnership. And honestly, I blame the NFL a bit for not being open to setting up the same system, because maybe you can make the argument that that college football is already enough of a preparation league. And maybe you can also claim that the founders of the AAF were in over their heads, suggesting that they were going to be a developmental league when they didn't have that partnership set in stone yet. And they only had 8 teams, by the way, far too few to reliably share players between any major team that was interested. Last Wednesday, when these rumors about the league going under were surfacing, it apparently all stemmed from this lack of connection between the minor and the major departments. The officials claimed that this couldn't go on if they didn't secure backing from the NFL, monetarily wise too. Also, I mean, there's teams like those that that own the ones who play in like the minor NBA G League that they have, that are willing to not fill stadiums and absorb the losses of managing and playing these developing players because they know they can use them later on. Now, there might be a side to the issue that essentially, I mean, the talent wasn't as good as the real game, even compared to the collegiate side. I mean, that is if you're going to judge it off of my impressions after the first week, where everything was a mess from the performance standpoint. But even still, I mean, when everyone was told to go home on Tuesday on the practice field, in the last few days, there's been a storm of articles with headlines like, this ex-AAF player is going to this team now, and this AAF quarterback might train with the Philadelphia Eagles, and this defensive player just went from the AAF to the Denver Broncos. And the NFL's nerve, I guess, to just come flying in now that all these players are out of a salary, it is one part frustrating that they couldn't just make a deal with the league, but another part, I guess, optimistic that they're saving these guys' careers. But the whole mismanagement of it is just poor, even the way it was broadcasted. All these games just disappeared from the public eye because they started to stream these AAF games from week 2 onwards over the internet on the CBS Sports Network platform, which is a subscription-based service that I'd estimate about like 90% of people didn't buy into to keep following the league after it had its first great week on television. So the founders, I guess they misplanned that, and they handed off their league to a different businessman who wasted like $70 million, keeping it all afloat until he could just eventually close the doors on it 2 weeks until the playoffs. And the 7-1 Orlando Apollos, I think, had the best record, and they could call themselves champions at the end of this. But what good does it do now? Is the thing. And this final point that I have is just speculation by this article from The Ringer. But what if this Tom Dundon bought this league for a while so he could own the technology that went into the league and made it so interactive and innovative? So like I said in February, you'll have cameras all over the field, on the referees' hats, microphones on players and coaches, let them hear all the action back home, and a smartphone app that tracks everybody's movements and made a game out of predicting plays. And obviously that's too good of an experiment to just throw away, so it's going to be used again somewhere. And if it shows up in the NFL, then I guess there'd be real proof of some kind of conspiracy going on, but I guess it's all rather unlikely. But anyway, that wraps up this story of the AAF, so you likely won't hear about this experiment again for a while, if at all. And that's actually all the time I have today in the studio. The final check of the Liverpool and Southampton game, which I will probably hurry back to my apartment to watch, is still at 1-1, and now they're at halftime, so there's some time to run back home. But for you guys, be sure to go online to youtube.com and search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger for my show archive, and I'll catch you back here next Friday with more news, more music, and another week in the books as we inch closer to the end of the semester. I appreciate you joining me this afternoon on WVOIC, and we'll leave things off with Cat Power and their song Woman here on the Voice of Your College. Take care, everybody, and have a great weekend.